So we're so lucky to have with us today the CEO and co-founder of a company called Lit Thinking. This is John Rajchert. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
So can you tell us first what your company's working on? What is your product and what you're doing?
What we do is specialize in something called far-UVC, which is ultraviolet wave group C technology. And the magical thing about it is that it is incredibly effective against airborne pathogens or germs, and it's harmless to humans. And it's this sort of holy grail of ultraviolet frequencies, around 200 to 230 nanometers, that allows it to be so effective but so safe at the same time. So it's kind of turning science on its head a little bit.
So, okay, it sounds like you have some kind of germ death ray. What is your product? Because I understand the electromagnetic spectrum, but what is your product and how does it work?
Yeah, how it works is really, really simple. I'll show you what the product is. And I'm going to try to, not make it too much of a sales pitch, but it really does sell itself. It's a device that has something called an emitter in there. That's about the size of it. And you just wire it just like a light that goes up, a can light in the ceiling, or you can surface mount it or whichever. And very, very low energy, about 15 watts of energy that it takes. It's silent, but what it does is it emits filtered UV light at a specific wavelength, 222 nanometers. That's somewhere in between 230, 200 nanometers, which is that effective wavelength. And that is highly effective against the DNA and also the protein layers on simple viruses, simple bacteria, but it's very, very safe for humans. So what you get is this magic that turns science on its head, that finally we've got something that's effective against pathogens that are so destructive, and we can do it in an occupied room without having to use sunglasses and sunscreen, just like you do out in the sunshine. So that's really the nub of it, is that it's an amazing technology that really the world hasn't woken up to yet.
So it's a light bulb. It emits a light bulb, but emits a specific frequency of electromagnetic spectrum that's ready to kill germs at a moment's notice. And so let's say that I'm in an office and I'm working with Zach in the office, and I am sick and I sneeze and I go, achoo. I think that we all have seen the multitude. We've all kind of had a pretty good kind of 101 class into this at this point.
Indeed.
Going through COVID, where there's going to be this big cloud of particulates, and it's, my spit and snot, and all of that's full of horrible,
all the gory details.
It's all full of whatever I'm sick with. This is how that disease spreads, is through me sneezing and coughing. And so I sneeze and I cough, and there's a huge cloud of this invisible particulate or whatever that is my spit and grossness, full of germs. And so the light bulb that you are selling is going to be emitting a particular wavelength of UV light that is going to go in and kill all of those pathogens. And by the time it reaches Zach, all of them are dead. Is that the idea?
The idea is to take the pathogens out of the background environment in a room.
So there's sort of snot, but just don't
two ways to think of this. The first one is if someone's standing up close and sneezes straight in your face, nothing is going to stop that other than personal protective equipment. You will get active pathogens, and it's just the speed and the amount is quite heavy. So you need to be careful about social distancing, but it's more the background infections that we address. And that is when you walk into an elevator, there's just have somebody coughing and spluttering in it, and you need to have that disinfected quickly. It's in a matter of seconds that it drops the overall pathogenic level down by 25%, then 50, then 90, then 99 in a logarithmic way. So by reducing the level, that burden level of pathogens in supermarkets, in hospitals, in mass transit, in office buildings, what you do is you take a huge chunk of infection risk out of the equation. It's not going to guarantee that you don't get sick, like I said. coughing in or sneezing in someone's faces. Well, it's pretty rude to start with, but it's something that it doesn't make you bulletproof is probably the easiest way to say it.
It's kind of a debuff for the airborne illnesses that you encounter. But so let's just talk about this. I mean, isn't this solved with filtration? Like if I get a HEPA filter and, I run the whole building's air system through the HEPA filter, aren't I doing the same thing?
You bet. So there's 3 ways to lower the pathogen burden inside a closed space, a hospital waiting room, an operating theatre. The first way that we think of is ventilation. Turn up the ventilation rate. And in fact, the CDC has recommended that last year. And the air conditioning peak body, ASHRAE, also recommended higher levels of ventilation. And that higher level of ventilation basically flushes those pathogens out. Obviously, you've got to have a source of fresh air to come in. You've got to be able to exhaust those out. And they've moved that from about 3 air changes in a good building per hour. Believe it or not, 3 air changes is all you get, and that's good ventilation. There's many, many places where it's down to 1.5 and 1. And that's really where you get that sick building syndrome and you're feeling sleepy. The carbon dioxide levels go up. So a good building, typically 3. CDC is recommending a minimum of 5. And ASHRAE, depending upon the application, it's a more complex equation that can go significantly higher. So places like hospitals, up to 15 air changes an hour. That's really, really expensive to do, considering how many buildings. It's the largest asset class in the world. So the energy implications are huge. The second way you can do it is by filtration with HEPA filters, MERV 15 filters, best HEPA filters. And they're very, very, very fine. They catch very fine particles, including pathogens. Now, the issue with air filters is that they make a noise, they're not that noisy, and you've got filter media that you often have to replace. So that in itself can be a biohazard as well. If you're capturing pathogens, you've got to do something with it, and there's a protocol. And you need people to do that. The third way is by using methods such as far-UVC. And why far-UVC is so effective is because it's effective on pathogens, but it doesn't harm humans. Regular UVC, and a good way to think about it, UVA, UVB, UVC, UVA ages, UVB burns. They both do, but that's a way to think of it. And then UVC gets into that finer area, and what we do is shine that up into the ceiling and into places that don't shine on people. And as you exhale, if you've got pathogens, typically hot air rises, so the more you talk, the hot air rises, it goes up and it's disinfected in that way. We see that UVC works, air filtration works, and ventilation works. What I like about far-UVC is that it works instantly. It's the ray of light rather than relying upon ventilation, the ventilation of a room that makes it so incredibly effective. So much so that in tests against other methodologies, it can defeat it. And then the more important part is it's very, very energy efficient. So that's really it. Energy efficient, it works, it's silent, and it's safe for humans.
Now, you mentioned testing. Have you guys tested this in any kind of real world scenarios?
Oh, yeah. We wouldn't sell it if we didn't test it. So the research on this has been going in sort of full measure for about 10 years. And the real father of far-UVC is a chap called Professor David Brenner from Columbia University. And he was instrumental in highlighting this particular bandwidth and then starting to conduct tests, certainly on animals and in particular mice which are highly susceptible to cancerous lesions when they're irradiated, and he's had spectacular success with those tests. And then on with humans, so much so that we're UL certified as a zero risk for photobiological safety, and that's a standard called 8802. And then there's a group, the ACGIH, the American College of Governmental and Industrial Hygienists, they're the peak body who set photobiological standards, and they've also provided limits and particular timing, and we also comply with that. So We pass all of the UL tests for electrical safety, photobiological safety, the OSHA tests, the health and safety tests, California CARB tests, and it's certified as being safe and ready to go. And we've installed it in a number of situations as well, as has competitors in the industry.
Let me just take a step back here. I mean, you mentioned that you do all these tests, and that sounds very good. But we are taking a UV light bulb, so to speak, and shining it down into offices that are full of people.
Yes.
And so, I mean, aren't all these people going to get sunburns and skin cancer and stuff like that?
No. And
So
that's the beauty
explain
of
to me
it.
how that works.
Yeah. So if you think about this spectrum, the tighter the wavelength you get high energy, which can kill pathogens. But what's really interesting is that it doesn't penetrate human skin. So the dead skin cell layer on your body, it's called the stratium corneum, which is that first layer, and below that you've got epidermis, dermis, all the way to the basal layers. We can't get through that dead skin cell layer. And what is really magic about that is because they're dead, they're shedding. You grow your skin from the inside out. And that, to me, is the key. The same story with eyes. You can't get through to do damage in the eyes at a level, obviously, that's effective against pathogens. So that's the beauty of it. You can provide these trace levels of far-UVC. It's not a lot of energy. In fact, it's in microwatts. And what you're able to do is, because pathogens are so delicate, we inactivate them. We stop them from reproducing because of the damage. And as a result, they die. That's it. They're ineffective. They can't multiply inside of you. And as a result, it dramatically reduces the risk of infection from just that background pathogens that you see. So that hopefully should add another layer of safety into the world, and particularly into people being able to come together again.
In your testing, have you come up with some hard number that me as a office building owner would be able to say, my buildings are now 20% safer?
Yeah, that's a good. Now this gets complicated, but I'll do the simple one first and then the complicated. The simple explanation is this: you go into a chamber, and there's many tests have been done, and what we do is we irradiate the chamber with these trace amounts of human safe UV, and then what you do is you measure how many pathogens, viruses or bacteria that it kills. Each type we identify, and we've developed a table. In fact, the industry, and don't take my word from it, many research universities have done many papers in terms of how long does it take and how much energy do you need to put in. And interestingly enough, the ones that are easy to kill are the ones that are most prolific. Influenza is one of them, and COVID and its many variants is another. So we've got very well-known tables of the kill time. So all you need to do is work out how big is a room, how tall is a room, so the floor area, the height, how many lights you've got, and that tells you how much energy is coming out, and away you go. You can create exactly that curve. The devices that we have are Wi-Fi connected, so what they do is they calculate. You put them into a room, they calculate, am I on? Is there a person in the room to start with? That's a good starting thing. It senses whether somebody's in the room or multiple people. And what it does is it simply applies that to a curve, and you can instantly on your app see how many % you have sanitized the room. Now, different viruses provide different levels of speed of sanitation, but that's broadly how we know in a simple way. You can do that, put it on a dashboard, and we've done that, and it works really, really well. And it provides a sense of peace of mind for people to use buildings again. And I think that a lot of people have developed this kind of, we're in this really interesting period, the way I look at it, and there's going to be lots and lots of psychological sort of papers written on this, is the effect of on society and on how we've socialized, how we talk with masks on, etc. Getting that normalized back again is a real task. So what we want to do is be able to provide some level of assurance. Again, it's not this absolute guarantee. It's not the bulletproof vest. a bulletproof vest won't protect you from someone shooting you in the knee, and neither will this protect you from somebody sneezing in your face. But it goes a heck of a long way to reducing that real risk number. So that's the simple explanation. It'll take hours to go through the complex, but I'm happy to go through it as well.
So, I mean, this is interesting from a number of different perspectives. So I think that kind of collectively gone, we're not going to care about COVID anymore because, oh my God, was that exhausting? And it seems like it's not a problem anymore. So we've all kind of shut up about it. But I think if we allow ourselves to go back and realize that a pandemic is something that could very well happen again in our lifetimes, it would sure be nice to have this in the case of that, where people don't want to wear masks, people don't want to vaccinate, many different reasons of people. They don't want to social distance. They don't want to do all sorts of different things. Having something like this is going to put a bit of a damper on, oh goodness, what was it? The R squared value of the virus or whatever. And that would prevent the kind of rampant uptick of people who got sick all at the same time. And that was the scariest part for so many people, was that it just seemed to sweep through schools and hospitals and stuff like that. And you felt like you couldn't go to the grocery store. And it was very scary for a lot of people. But I think there's another aspect to look at it, since now we don't care about COVID and we don't want to think about it. And that would be seasonal illnesses, not necessarily allergies, but actual illnesses, flu, colds, that sort of thing. I think that we're all kind of well aware that, we should take more vitamin C in the winter months because sometimes flu is just going to run through an office or it's going to run through a school, and suddenly all your kids are going to come home with the flu. They're going to give everybody in your house the flu. Then you're going to go to work. You're going to give everybody in your office the flu, and it's going to almost come back around. Normally you don't get the flu twice in a season. But if this were in an office and in the school, that would reduce the number of cases of flu. It would reduce the number of cases of cold, and you'd have a bit of a, I mean, am I thinking of this correctly? That basically it'd be less prevalent?
Thinking of it very. That's absolutely correct, and I think you touched on a number of things. There are no absolute hard and fast numbers to say that if you take 25% of the background pathogens out of the air, you will reduce your risk of infection by 25%. And the reason why that's the case is that viruses, bacteria, they're all a little bit different, just like people are different. One person can walk through an infected space one day and not be infected, and they can walk through an infected space the next day and get infected. So there are a lot of microbiological, epidemiological factors here. But the bottom line is, a simple way to think of it is, I take away half of the pathogens, I take away a huge chunk of the risk of inhaling a pathogen. Now, the reason why I say it's complex is simply because nobody knows where they got sick. Was it on the plane? Was it in the taxi, the train, the bus? Was it in the supermarket when I went to buy milk just after I got home? Or was it that meeting that I had just before I traveled on the plane? Everyone's got a different story, and we all suspect, it was that person sneezing in the seat a few seats ahead of me.
That's really difficult. Osmosis Jones in your body, solving the mystery of how you got sick.
And if you're able to do that, so the first thing is, you can't identify what type of pathogen it is. It takes time. You've got to culture, you've got to grow, you've got to grow these colony forming units, these enough that you can, it's like a DNA test. You've got to grow them and culture them, and then you can count them. And the second thing is, when somebody gets sick, it takes often a couple of days for that to appear. So there's a lot of detective work that has to be done. And that's the reason why, wouldn't it be great to have a sensor that could instantly detect viruses, instantly detect what sort it was, etc. So until that time, and maybe that day will come soon, until that time, what we have to do is take these prophylactic measures. The way I'd like to think about it is this, that it took years to get people to realize that, washing your hands, particularly the medical establishment, washing your hands was a direct contributor to how successful an operation would be. So washing hands, the way that germs work, etc., basic hygiene. We're at this point now where it's hard to sort of take in. Most people took a certain joy in throwing out their masks, face masks. When the last face mask mandates were dismantled, everyone took this great joy in throwing every mask you could out. Now, it's not going to be another 100 years until the next pandemic. Let's be clear. I mean, we're right at that far end of antibiotic line of defense. You are at the last chance antibiotics. We've got this problem with antibiotics. The second one is population. And the third, which is key, is the number of animals in the world and the proximity of those animals and the number of animals that are farm animals versus wild animals, etc., creates huge risk. And it's just a numbers risk. It's how many viruses are produced, how many mutate, how many survive, how many can be virulent. And then that's what gets these things going. So we're in this sort of tinderbox that I see. So it's not just to say it's for seasonal flu. And that kills, remember, it kills a huge number of people a year globally and tens of thousands in the US. Hospital-acquired infections, around 99,000 a year of deaths, 1.7 million of infections just in the United States. So there's always going to be those things, but it's also that threat of pandemic or biological warfare that we need to prepare against. So I don't want to sound too outlandish, too extreme, but I think it's a very real risk, and these are very simple, energy effective steps to say, rather than having to spend a fortune in energy to turn up the ventilation, what you've got is an effective air exchange rate with far-UV that really, frankly, works. And that's where I see this as being something that's going to change the world.
From a disruptive investor point of view, this does seem really good. It seems to check off a lot of boxes for disrupting, because you just mentioned it's way more energy efficient than using filtration and HVAC and stuff. So if I was CEO of the company, I'd be like, this is great. The total addressable market is like the entire planet, right? I mean, we all went through the pandemic, so we all know now the risks. It's actually perfect from a business point of view, because before the pandemic, you could have argued like, I don't care about the flu, but now you can't. So it seems like also, if we look at the use cases, you just held up that unit. And as a contractor, I know that goes into any building. I mean, any building that has a ceiling, you can put it in. So that's perfect. So what are you looking for as your first customers? Are they big like schools and government buildings? Are they everybody? Are they households?
The good news about installing it is easy. It's you don't need a special license. You need to know where to put them. They've got to be installed at the correct height. But other than having an active, a neutral, and an earth, there's no rocket science, and then you can commission them just like a home thermostat. So that's fairly easy. Where we see the market growing, it's if you think about the laws of adoption of innovation, it's accelerating nicely. And in fact, the pandemic was a disruptor because everyone was irrational and buying things out of control. What companies are starting to do now is think about resilience and then think about productivity and employee productivity. If I can win the war for talent by showing employees that I care by having these installed. I can win the war of productivity because that business of absenteeism or presenteeism, where somebody is sick but turning up at work and being less productive and infectious as well, being able to combat that in a meaningful way. And like I said, there's no absolute magic bullet. That to me is something that is got a real strength. So from a disruptive technology perspective, we're at early adopter stage. What we're seeing is particularly healthcare related. Our first customers, frankly, are in the healthcare area and also in healthcare education. We've got a pre-K nursery school. We've got just coming up a couple of aged care homes. So, you've got this immunocompromised population as well. I didn't mention that. 3% of the American population are immunocompromised. And, what are we doing about that? I mean, I think we do. It's taken so long to acknowledge people who are disabled, whether they're mobility disabled, visually disabled, intellectually disabled. We've got to also recognize immunologically disabled people who are immunocompromised and allow them to participate in society as well. It's not good enough just to expect them to spend the rest of their life shopping online. They need to be able to we need to take reasonable steps to accommodate them. So I think that it starts with healthcare, it goes into education, but think about all of the places where you've got people meeting that are from different cells. So it's not really a residential offering because you're always going to kiss your kids, your spouse goodnight. You're always going to have that intimacy. It's about when people come together from different bubbles. And so healthcare, education, mass transit, airports and the like, immigration halls, imagine. security lines, imagine that, commercial office buildings, and government and critical infrastructure, defence. They're typical applications that we see, and what we're seeing is the big interest at the moment is from that healthcare community, and I think it'll trickle down from there. Healthcare and education, and it'll trickle down.
So, okay, we've talked about how the operational cost of this is very low. It's drawing 15 watts. It sounds it sounds pretty efficient to me. And you don't have to change your ventilation system and run the blower all the time and put in expensive HEPA filters. So that's good. But what about the CapEx? How much do each of these cost? Is this really eye-watering something?
It's not cheap and it's not expensive. So it's energy efficient. So cost of operation, it's silent and it's maintenance free. They run for about 10,000 hours before you have to change the bulb. To buy them, it depends upon the volume. If you buy one, it's about $2,000. If you buy many, it's a lot close to $1,000. And it sits at around about 200 square feet per unit. It depends on the model you buy, where it's mounted. And you typically focus on doing buildings in places like the coffee room, open office spaces, conference rooms. So it doesn't have to be in the fire stairs or anything like that. We're talking about areas where you're reducing risk in a meaningful way. And typically, if you've got, say, a 10,000 square foot building or a 50,000 square foot building, you might put 10,000 square feet of fixtures into there, or 5,000 square feet. So you can start small and work big, and typically go for the more populated areas first. So it's affordable, and particularly the thing I like is it's scalable. You can start with one and grow from there, or you can fit a whole building out, and it's cheap for in terms of installation because it's just a regular electrician, and we're not having to tear ceilings down or reroute ducting or anything like that. So it's all pretty straightforward, typically a day.
I feel like with certain cases like this, it's almost priceless how valuable it is to be able to go to a space with other people. I'm thinking of education, for example. During COVID, it was just heartbreaking to see children not being able to go to school. And so the thought of being able to spend almost any amount of money to get them back to school safely would have been great. It's just that at the time the only way we could think of was, masks or something like that, which didn't really help in terms of kids being together. So that seems like a no-brainer. But I guess my thought goes to IP. So why can't Jesse and I just go get some tanning bulbs and, take out some halo light fixtures and just rig these up and compete with you?
I mean, you can set up as a snake oil merchant and a witch doctor as well. At the end of the day, there is a couple of things. So what are the barriers to entry to this market? The barriers to entry, the first one is a regulatory barrier. There are fairly stringent standards. And in doing that, those standards will continue to evolve and continue to get refined. So that's the first thing. You have to have these things tested. Now, in order to make this product, it's tough. You use a high voltage krypton chloride eczema. Sorry for the language, but that's complicated. It's a high voltage device, and you have to enclose that into a smaller unit, and that makes a lot of electrical noise. So having the right electromagnetic interference prevention measures in there is important. And most importantly, you've got to screen. You've got to have an optical screen to ensure that you're not emitting any meaningful level of UVC light, because the light bulb doesn't just exactly go at 222 nanometers. It ranges. It's got a peak of 222 and it drops off quickly, but you've got to be able to filter out anything above 230 nanometers. So that's what we're able to do. We partner with other manufacturers to do that. But then what we do is we create a huge amount of IP, the logic board, being able to switch the thing on when someone comes into the room, switch it off when they're not there, the sanitization curve, being able to calculate that, putting it on time schedules and those things. So it's got some barriers to entry from a technology perspective, but the applications expertise, that's the part that we found the hardest. We've been in business a couple of years. We put a lot of effort into it, and building a working knowledge of how to apply this. I have to say, it doesn't matter whether you're a small company or a large company. It takes a lot of hours to get the formula right. So that's important. It'll sit in an ecosystem, a building management ecosystem, or our own ecosystem, as it were. And I think that this is a great opportunity in my mind to open up a completely new part of indoor air quality that is going to benefit humanity and obviously benefit the players who are in this industry, who survive it through that early adoption curve and into the early mass market, which hopefully will happen in the next year or two.
All right. Well, I just changed up our business model. We're not going to do exactly what you're doing. We're going to put our UV into like HEPA filters and up into the HVAC plenums and stuff like that. So how about that? Why can't we just do that?
Great idea. So the first thing I'd say is putting it into the HVAC is an awesome idea. And if you can put enough energy into that HVAC duct or plenum so that as the air moves along at the rate that it moves along, you're able to disinfect at speed, then great. But remember, what you're trying to disinfect is the working area where people work. You're not trying to disinfect the duct, you're trying to disinfect that area. So it's a lot better to have human safe light directly at that work environment between 3 and 6, 7 feet where people exist, because otherwise it's for naught. Now, that's hard to put it into the air conditioning, but what it can do is it can help with energy efficiency by irradiating, and that's one of our, as we move along in our product development curve, irradiating the air conditioning, the cold deck, which has always got condensation, being able to prevent biofilms from forming. So that's important as well. So I think you can do it. The question is, and let me just say this, ventilation is important, filtration is important, irradiation is important. You work together to provide the best solution. I just happen to have my horse with far-UVC, human safe light, and I think that is the most efficient application for the biggest opportunity in the market at the moment.
Because it kind of makes sense. I mean, you were talking about 3 air changes per hour, maybe up to 5. So we're talking about somewhere from 12 to 20 minutes, where if I sneeze, it's going to kind of be around for about 20 minutes before it gets brought through the ventilation system. So it makes sense where you'd want it. The moment it comes out of my nose,
you want to be attacking it
Well, John,
the direct line of sight rather than thinking about fluid dynamics, the still areas in a room, the corners, et cetera, yeah.
Well, John, I want to put a product request in then. I want like a backpack that has the halo of this light over my head. So when I get on the train or the plane, I've always got the light on me. Is that possible?
Right.
Can we invent that?
I want a Ghostbusters backpack with the somebody sneezes.
Well, I think we've all seen those novel, the guy with the backpack thing with the umbrella over their head, or they've got the fan and the water spray. I think any of that's possible, but let me be. There's got to be a level of common sense. The last thing we should do is promote an industry that has the suggestion that we will make you bulletproof when we won't. So what we've been really focused on is having these fixtures properly engineered, the calculations correct, the certifications for both safety and efficacy correct, before we start thinking about how do I make a portable unit. So I subscribe to putting them in cars, in buses, in trains, in airplanes, in all of those. But where it gets complex is if you've got a personal device, and a number of companies, respected companies, make them. And what happens is if you get too close, and then the amount of energy you absorb it's a square function of the distance. So what it does is it switches off if it's too close. But you can take them, battery-powered ones that are portable. You can set them up on a coffee table when you're having a meeting. Now that all works. The only caveat I put is they're generally relatively low power, and they help. But do they help enough? That's the question. And we're in the infancy here, so we're taking it, at a step at a time and saying, make the building safe or dramatically safer, and we'll, as we move into this where you've got the umbrella with the shining light, the halo over your head. I think forms of that are certainly on their way.
You just mentioned airplanes, and I feel like that's one space where we all feel really trapped. We're going to be on there for hours, and if someone sneezes, we can't just leave like you could with a building or a room. Is it possible that we could get these installed on an airplane?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that would stop things technically at all from putting them in airplanes. I mean, I think aerospace development is a relatively slow and cautious cycle, but certainly installing them on aircraft, there's no barrier or restriction that I know of that wouldn't allow us to do that now. I think the thing that you've got to keep remembering, right, is, and the thing that I've learned is that it's such an obvious thing that's good for the world, but Who owns the problem? Does the airline own the problem? Does the aircraft manufacturer own the problem? Does the passenger own the problem? You know, how many of us who feel, oh, I've got a little tickle in my throat, but I've got to go on a flight? Do you put the mask on out of care for other passengers? And remember, you know, you don't catch an airborne infection from the aircraft that you know of. You might suspect it, but you just don't know. So I think it's a hard business case, you know, visually clean cabins, a lot more tactile ways of cleaning tend to have a better psychological effect on people. You know, seeing people in white overalls wiping things down with sanitizers that smell of alcohol. So would this work on an airplane? Absolutely.
I feel like if I had choice between JetBlue and American Airlines and one was going to use this product and one wasn't, I would pay a lot more for that seat. I don't know about you.
I mean, I think
comment down below, everybody,
well,
if you're on my side with this one.
Clearly, you care about the particulars of this, and thank goodness that you do, because it's an important aspect of it. But I do think that when we get into more of the marketing, it seems like if you can establish your brand as a name that I trust and that I understand the technology, which is something that clearly has not happened yet because I've never heard of lit thinking, no offense, but you know, you're relatively new. If people start to understand this as a concept and they are thinking about it in those terms, especially when you don't want to get sick. I'm going to go on vacation. I don't want to, you know, get to the place that I have been dreaming of going my entire life. And I caught the thing on the plane. And for the rest of the vacation, I am sick. So the first 2 days were nice. And then I felt a little something. And then the third day I woke up with a fever.
And by the way, who hasn't done that?
Right.
I mean, if you've, you know, it's a business trip or a holiday.
From an airline perspective, to just say we're protected with this, they have a very strong case, I think, to explain the technology. It could be one of the first spots that you use it, because in terms of a high stake environment, you know, if I get sick at the office, I get to stay home from work for a couple of days. Maybe I kind of like it. Yeah, I was sick and I, you know, was not feeling well, but I got to stay home and watch The Office. When or even though I'm not in the office, but if I am going on a trip, I really do care about it. It seems like if I'm like, oh, I only fly with JetBlue because they're the only ones who have, you know, Visium in it, or they're the only ones that have lit thinking bulbs, and that I know that it's going to be safer, and I'll still wear my mask, but I still feel safer. I think that for a lot of people, especially this reintegration, I think that there's this curve of people who are. Some people are absolutely still terrified of catching COVID or any disease now. We've practically created a bunch of people who have... Well,
there's 10 million people in the US alone who are immunocompromised, many from long COVID.
But even people who aren't immunocompromised are now are still just scared because they went through a very traumatic event.
Let's give John some data. Would you pay $100 for a plane ticket if you had... this technology?
Right, would you pay $100 more?
I would, because it's just an insurance policy for me.
I mean, maybe if I'm going on a business trip and I didn't want to go, maybe not. But if I'm going on the vacation of my lifetime that I spend thousands of dollars on, and you know, and I don't want to be sick,
I think if you asked anybody, you know, like $100 to not get sick, most people would be, sure, no problem.
I think you're onto something there, and I'd encourage, it's not just airplanes, but what about a retail experience? The mall. The restaurant. These are the places where it's that moment, you know, and the other one, of course, the no-brainer of everything, elevators. I mean, elevators are really well ventilated just by virtue of the speed at which they work. But how do you really cap that off by doing, you know, that double safety? You've got ventilation and you've got far-UV. So there are 1,000 applications. And I'd be interested in, because I think this will come from demand. If you think about it, it's not the users that are going to buy it. It's the airlines that are going to buy it. It's not the shoppers that are going to buy it. It's the supermarket or the retailer that's going to buy it. So what is it about demand that they're going to say, hang on a minute, because what they're going to buy on is the risk or the opportunity of changing market share.
Yes.
I can either charge more or I can get more people coming in for more transactions and take share off my competitor if I can differentiate. And I see this as in that adoption curve as they go through, as the world becomes more comfortable with this, and the expectation raises. And at the risk of, you know, going off on a tangent, back in the 1800s, you know, you'd have these big families in America, in Europe, 7 kids, 8 kids, 10 kids, 12 kids. Generally, at least one of them died in their infancy of something like diphtheria, whooping cough, you know, tuberculosis. My own grandmother died of tuberculosis. These were things that were expectations 150, 200 years ago. Now they're huge family tragedies. And I think as we move forward, we think of, getting really sick with the flu or, God forbid, anything worse as, it's just part of life. You know what I mean? It's just part of life. And I think as we move forward, people are going to say, no, if it doesn't have to be part of life, I don't want it to be. And that's what I demand. And demand drives business. That's for sure.
So talk to me about where you guys are at in terms of funding. Is there any chance that our viewers or investors watching could get in on like a crowdfunding round or maybe a future IPO?
Yeah, we certainly are always interested in direct inquiries. We're not looking at crowdfunding at the moment, but that's a great thought. But we are thinking of Series B, Series C rounds as well, and not for any other reason than that's going to accelerate what we do. And we think that as we go out of this early adoption period, having a broader base of offerings, having more research, having a more robust, larger app and an ecosystem that allows people, because people expect, they want to be able to look at their phone and expect, if I go downstairs to Starbucks, it'd be great to know how many people are in Starbucks, but I'd also love to know if it's fitted out with this technology and what's the sanitization score. Am I just in there to quickly run in and pick up my online order, or I'm in there to wait in the line, or I'm in there to meet somebody? That's the kind of thing that I see as we move forward. So yeah, we're always interested in investors, but at the moment we're doing very well. But I'd love to. Certainly, anyone who's interested, I'd love to hear from you.
And then lastly, John, the price of the unit, is it possible that when you guys get to a bigger and bigger scale, that the price will drop down to someday someone being able to buy this on Amazon? Is that
absolutely?
You think so?
Yeah, without a doubt. Like at the moment, the market price is, look, there's going to be people who are really expensive, people who are really cheap, and you've got to, caveat emptor, as they say, let the buyer beware. Make sure that it's certified, it's got proper engineering, and read the fine print. But at the end of the day, it'll get down very, very rapidly with volume. There's no question about that. In our own company, we've got some pretty big swings when we look at production volume, what our run is. We can drop prices. But the one thing you're onto is that a big part of our operation is developing a far-UV LED. And at the moment, they exist, but they're just not commercially viable. They don't have a long enough life. They don't have enough output. We think we can create one in the next couple of years. That'll mean that it's just like the electric light bulb industry, how that's been transformed. Long life, very small, highly power efficient, very reliable, and most importantly, cheap to make devices. So you could put them in every bulb, for example, and trace elements of far-UV would be there to make homes and offices inherently more lower risk for people to connect with. So that's on its way. But what I see is it'll go from thousands to hundreds fairly rapidly, and down there in the low hundreds, I predict, in the next couple of years. So that to me is very much about volume.
I'd love to talk just a little bit more about an LED version of this. So right now you're not doing it in LED; it's an actual bulb. What was the unbelievably complicated xenon kryptonite?
Well, there's plenty of xenon krypton. So this is a krypton chloride eczema, and again, I'll show you what it is. Is when you excite these noble gases and you use high voltage to do it, what you get is an emission, a photon emission, and the photon emission has a peak wavelength of 222 nanometers.
But it's a rather wide distribution.
It's a bell curve, and it's got a footprint, and it's to be frank, it's fairly narrow. You know what I mean. And you can think of yellow light, red light, green light, etc. The same thing. It's got a peak right at that green within the visible spectrum, or a peak in yellow, peak in red. The most important thing is if you create these photons and you don't put a filter on, anything above 230 nanometers has a risk of what normal UV does, which burns, and it's not good for you. So that's why we put that in, to ensure that there's no emissions that are there. The other important thing is on the other side, the lower your wavelength, the more likely you're going to generate ozone. And ozone, I think, as we all know, isn't great. We've gone so far, when I talked about certifications, as I think we've got the balance right. So we went forward to UL and we got certified to 2998, which is a zero ozone device. So it's so minuscule that you can barely measure it. And to my knowledge, it's the only one in the industry that has that as well. So you've got to be very, very careful about how you apply this. And that's really the moral to the story, and that is the barrier to entry. And maybe I might be hiding behind it. I don't think so. It's complex. It's not that complex. We've done it. Other companies have done it. But I think it's not something just like you can become a lighting manufacturer and just knock one out tomorrow. It doesn't work like that.
But basically, if you could get an LED, would it emit a even more narrow spectrum?
Oh, yeah. Great question. Ideally you want to have a low-cost LED that's tiny, highly energy efficient, and almost monochromatic. It's a single frequency, but obviously there will be a broader spectrum. If you get a laser, for example, that's a very, very monochromatic, very single sort of frequency and synchronized output. So being able to do that, you will get some inherent, and we see that with our research, we'll get to a point where they're not 0.1% efficient, but we want to get them 10, 20, 30% efficient to match the visible spectrum LEDs are up to 90%, nearly 100% efficient, being able to convert all the energy or electricity into 100% of photons and very, very little heat.
It's a really interesting concept to be actually able to take an LED like that and incorporate it into a normal LED light bulb. Which is interesting. You mentioned that.
Yeah.
It would be the problem would be that then people would be looking for these older LED light bulbs that didn't have those lamps, because they'd be like, oh, when I'm making my sourdough, I'm not going to be able to inoculate my my starter because it won't, it'll be an interesting.
It'll kill the yeast.
It's a fun problem. I mean, it's an interesting way to think of it. How niche that will be in the future, where it's going to be a lot harder to get sick. It's amazing. It's amazing to see that this technology has not necessarily a way to go, but there is such a continuation that we could continue to go down and think about. And that it sounds like you guys are working on that.
Yeah. If you think about the whole sector, it's the indoor air quality. Everything works, it's hand in pocket. How many people are in a room is the CO2, carbon dioxide levels, when they go up, that makes you sleepy, it makes you drowsy. It's lousy for human life. And interestingly enough, 400 parts per million is about, the standard at the moment, in the world. Back in the 60s, it was in the 300s and somethings, So when we talk about carbon dioxide increasing, it really is increasing. Now, if you go into an office building and you've got, 100 people jammed into an open office and there's got lousy air conditioning, you know what it's like. I mean, we've all been in buildings where the air conditioning has failed. And it's really, really stuffy. An aeroplane, those times when you're stuck there and the auxiliary power unit isn't on and they haven't got the air conditioning on, and it's miserable. And that's how quick it is. And that's that CO2 going up. Carbon, volatile organic compounds, ozone, particulates, and there's a lot of science around secondary chemistry ensuring that those particulate levels are down. So this is, imagine it's one arrow in the quiver of all the things we can do with indoor air quality, with ventilation, with filtration, with the right use of fresh air. And now this amazing new arrow, which is about human safe irradiation that is so good. Instead of just clean air, I'd rather have safe air. Remember, clean air will make you fit. Safe air or unsafe air can kill you. That's the thing you've got to remember. So I think that's where it fits. And it's now just about continuing the education process, working with the early adopters who frankly are saving lives. I mean, I just want to keep emphasizing that. Never before have I worked for Honeywell for 30 years doing amazing things for the environment. Energy efficiency in buildings, safety in buildings, security in buildings. And in the 2 years that I've done this, I've had more people say, God bless you, good on you. And, they pat you on the back for what you're doing. And I think that it gives me a sort of a warm and fuzzy feeling without getting too into the psychology of it. But it is a good feeling to be doing something for humanity. And it's even better to start seeing the market now adopt it, use it, put it to work, and start seeing results.
I love on your website, it says our work will change the world. And I think it will. And John, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to us and share this. If people are interested and they want to learn more, where should they go?
www.litthinking, all spelled together, LIT thinking.com. Feel free to contact us. There's easy to contact, and we'd love to hear from anyone that's interested in spreading the word. Obviously, if you'd like to invest a lot of money, I'd love you to. So always looking for them. And I sort of a word, we've got some tremendous sponsors at the moment, tremendous investors, and I think kudos to them for the vision that they've had in investing in this and helping us to start this company up. So litthinking.com, two T's, litthinking.com.
Thank you so much, John. I can't wait to hear more about your company in the years that follow.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Jesse. It's a pleasure talking.